The arena was electric. Thousands of fans filled the seats, lights blazing down onto the polished mat at the center. Camera drones hovered above, commentators buzzing with excitement. Tonight wasn't just another exhibition, it was being marketed as a clash of legends. On one side stood Chuck Norris, confident, smiling, soaking in the cheers like fuel. Every step he took was backed by decades of reputation, knockouts, and myth. The crowd loved him, and he knew it. On the other side stood Steven Seagal. No loud entrance. No dramatic gestures. Just calm stillness. He wore simple training clothes, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady. While the crowd roared for Chuck, Steven simply observed, as if the noise didn't exist. Chuck glanced across the mat, and smirked. He leaned toward the microphone and laughed. "Seriously," he said, shaking his head. "This is what they call a fighting style now. Aikido." The audience erupted in laughter. Chuck paced slowly, circling Steven like a predator sizing up prey. "Let's be honest," Chuck continued. "Aikido looks great in movies. But in a real arena." He shrugged. "It's just dancing." More laughter. Louder this time. Steven didn't respond. That silence only encouraged Chuck. He mimicked slow, exaggerated movements, waving his arms mockingly. The commentators chuckled, one of them saying, "Looks like Steven's already frozen." Steven raised his eyes, calm, unreadable. Chuck stepped closer. "So tell me," Chuck said, standing inches away now, "are you here to fight, or to meditate?" Still no answer. The crowd began to chant Chuck's name. Then, in a moment that felt small but would later be replayed millions of times, Chuck reached out and grabbed Steven's wrist. Hard. Confident. Certain. A security official shifted nervously. The commentators fell quiet. Steven finally spoke, his voice low, steady, almost gentle. "Don't touch me again." Chuck laughed. "Or what?" Steven slowly turned his wrist, just slightly. The lights seemed to dim. The noise faded. And in that single second, something changed in the arena. Backhand index pointing right, what happened next would leave every single person there completely stunned. The laughter didn't stop right away. After Steven's quiet warning, the crowd still buzzed with confidence. Chuck's confidence. Cameras zoomed in, commentators whispered, and thousands of eyes stayed locked on the two men standing just feet apart at center mat. Chuck Norris chuckled, shaking his head as if he'd just heard a joke. "Did you hear that?" he said into the mic. "Don't touch me again." He turned to the audience, spreading his arms wide. "This isn't a tea ceremony, folks. This is an arena." The cheers grew louder. Across from him, Steven Seagal remained still. His wrist had returned to its relaxed position, fingers loose, posture upright. He hadn't pulled away. He hadn't braced. He hadn't reacted at all. That calm unsettled a few people in the front rows. Chuck stepped closer again. "You know what your problem is," Chuck said, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimidating. "You rely on people not wanting to hurt you." Steven met his eyes. "I rely on people making mistakes," he replied quietly. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chuck scoffed. Big words for someone who hasn't moved. He lifted his hands into a loose fighting stance, not aggressive yet, but clearly dominant. The referees glanced at each other, unsure if this was still showmanship or something else. Chuck flicked a quick jab toward Steven's shoulder, not full power, just enough to test him. Steven shifted his weight by inches. The punch missed. Barely. To most of the crowd, it looked like luck. Chuck smiled wider. "See," he said. "I could have hit you any time." Steven didn't correct him. Instead, he took one slow step forward. The arena quieted, just a little. Chuck circled again, now more cautious, though he'd never admit it. He began narrating his movements, turning the moment into a performance. "This is what real fighting looks like," he said. "Pressure. Speed. Control." Steven answered calmly. "Speed without balance is noise." That line hit harder than expected. The commentators stopped laughing. In the stands, phones began to rise. People sensed something changing, not action yet, but energy. The kind that comes right before a storm. Chuck exhaled sharply through his nose. You think you're teaching me a lesson? Stephen's voice stayed even. No. I'm giving you a chance to stop. That did it. Chuck's jaw tightened. The smile disappeared. He stepped in fast, grabbing for Stephen's arm again, this time with intent. Security leaned forward. Referees tensed. The crowd held its breath. Do you think Aikido really works in a real fight? Comment yes or no. Stephen didn't pull away. He let the grip happen. And for the first time that night, Chuck Norris felt something he didn't expect. Not pain. Not resistance. But uncertainty. Because the moment his hand closed around Stephen's wrist, Stephen's balance didn't break. Chuck's did. For a brief moment, the arena forgot how to breathe. Chuck Norris loosened his grip without realizing it, his brows knitting together. Something about the exchange felt off. He had grabbed plenty of opponents before. Strong men. Fast men. Trained fighters. But this was different. Across from him, Steven Seagal hadn't tensed. He hadn't resisted. His posture stayed tall, spine aligned, shoulders relaxed. It was as if the grip meant nothing. Chuck stepped back half a pace, masking his hesitation with bravado. Nice trick, he said loudly. You almost made me think something happened. The crowd laughed again, but the sound was thinner now. Less confident. Stephen didn't smile. You're gripping with your arms, he said calmly. Not your center. Chuck scoffed. You giving lessons now? I'm explaining why you're uncomfortable. That sentence landed harder than any strike. A few rows back, someone whispered, Did you see Chuck's face? Chuck's jaw tightened. He hated being read, especially in front of thousands. Especially by someone who wasn't supposed to be a threat. He raised his voice. You know what I see? Chuck said, pacing again. I see a man hiding behind theory. Balance. Energy. Flow. He stopped suddenly and pointed at Stephen. But this is real life. Real fights don't care about philosophy. Stephen nodded once. Neither does gravity. The referees exchanged glances. This had gone far beyond playful banter. The commentators lowered their voices, sensing a turn. Chuck stepped in fast, faster than before. This time, there was no test strike. He shoved Stephen's chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Stephen slid back a step, shoes gliding across the mat, smooth, controlled. He didn't stumble. He didn't react with anger. Behind the barricades, security stood up. Careful, someone shouted from the stands. Chuck followed, feeding off the tension. What's wrong? He mocked. Still meditating. Stephen lifted his eyes. There was no fear there. Just focus. You don't need to keep proving yourself, Stephen said. You already know this isn't what you expected. Chuck froze for half a second, just enough to confirm it was true. That hesitation turned into anger. You think I'm scared of you? Chuck snapped. He lunged again, grabbing Stephen's arm with both hands now, pulling hard, a move meant to dominate, to drag him off balance and expose him. The crowd erupted. Stephen's foot pivoted. A subtle turn. A small adjustment of hips. Nothing dramatic. Yet Chuck's pull went nowhere. Instead of Stephen being dragged forward, Chuck felt his own weight shift awkwardly, his stance widening as he fought to stay grounded. For the first time, he had to work just to stand still. The laughter stopped completely. Phones rose higher. Red recording lights dotted the stands like stars. Stephen leaned slightly closer, voice still low. You're forcing it, he said. That's why it feels heavy. Chuck yanked again, harder. Pain flickered through his wrist. Not sharp. Not damaging. Just wrong. The kind of sensation that made experienced fighters pause. The arena buzzed with nervous energy now. Who do you think is in control right now, Chuck or Stephen? Comment below, backhand index pointing down. Chuck released the grip abruptly and stepped back, shaking his hand as if clearing numbness. Enough talking, he said, breath sharper than before. Let's see if your balance works against speed. Stephen straightened fully, Hands open, stance neutral. I hoped you'd say that. The crowd leaned forward as one. Chuck dropped into a fighting stance, real this time. No jokes. No show. Muscles coiled. Eyes locked. Stephen didn't mirror him. He simply waited. The space between them felt charged, like the second before lightning strikes. And everyone in the arena sensed it now. This wasn't about mockery anymore. This wasn't about styles. It was about control. And in the silence before the next move, one question echoed through thousands of minds. What happens when force meets absolute calm? The arena fell into an uneasy hush. No chants. No laughter. Only the soft hum of lights overhead and the faint rustle of people shifting in their seats. At the center of it all stood Chuck Norris, squared up now, breathing measured but heavier than before. The confidence was still there, but it had changed shape. Sharper. Tighter. Less playful. Across from him, Steven Seagal waited. Hands open. Knees loose. Eyes steady. He hadn't taken a fighting stance. He hadn't raised his guard. To the untrained eye, it looked careless. Almost disrespectful. But the seasoned fighters in the crowd felt something else. Why isn't he guarding? Someone whispered. Because he doesn't need to, another replied. Chuck took a slow step forward. Stephen didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. The distance closed to less than an arm's length, and suddenly the scale of the moment hit everyone watching. Two legends. Two philosophies. One mistake away from chaos. Chuck broke the silence. You know, he said quietly, no microphone now, people have been doubting Aikido for years. Stephen nodded. I know. They say it only works if the other guy cooperates. Stephen's lips curved, not into a smile, but something close. They're right, he said. They just misunderstand who's cooperating. Chuck frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Stephen didn't answer. Instead, he shifted his weight, barely noticeable. A subtle adjustment through his hips, like aligning gears. Chuck felt it. Not physically, yet. But instinctively. His shoulders tensed. He didn't like not knowing what came next. He feinted left, fast. Stephen stepped in, not away. The move was wrong on paper. Every striking system taught distance. Guard. Retreat. Stephen closed space instead. Chuck's feint turned into a real strike mid-motion, his fist snapping forward with controlled speed. Stephen turned his body sideways, letting the punch skim past his shoulder by inches. At the same time, his hand brushed Chuck's forearm, not grabbing, not blocking. Guiding. Chuck overextended just a fraction. To the crowd, it looked like nothing. To Chuck, it felt like stepping onto ice. He adjusted quickly, recovering his stance. But his eyes narrowed now. He was no longer performing. He was calculating. You keep walking into danger, Chuck warned. Stephen replied softly, you keep creating it. Chuck attacked again, a combination this time. Sharp. Disciplined. The kind of flurry that had ended countless fights. Stephen didn't retreat. He entered. Every strike missed by margins too small to be coincidence. Each time, Stephen's body angled just enough, his feet tracing invisible circles on the mat. His hands made brief contact, wrist, elbow, shoulder, redirecting momentum without force. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched. Because something strange was happening. Chuck was doing all the work. And Stephen was doing all the controlling. Breaths grew louder. Chuck's, not Stephen's. A commentator finally broke the silence. I've never seen this, he muttered. It's like Chuck's fighting space. Chuck felt it too. Every time he pushed forward, he felt pulled. Every time he tried to reset, the angle felt wrong. His balance wasn't gone, but it was constantly threatened. He backed off again, shaking his head. This isn't over, he said, almost to himself. Stephen inclined his head slightly. It never is, he replied. Until it is. The tension in the arena was unbearable now. People leaned forward, gripping armrests, phones forgotten in their hands. No one wanted to blink. Because everyone felt it. The moment was approaching. Not the strike. Not the throw. The decision. Do you think Steven is avoiding the fight, or controlling it? Comment, avoiding, or controlling. Chuck exhaled slowly, centering himself. He knew what he had to do. No more testing. No more feints. He would commit. And as he stepped forward one last time, planting his foot, loading his weight, preparing to unleash everything he had, Steven shifted. Just once. And the entire arena sensed it. Whatever was coming next, there would be no going back. The air felt heavy, like the arena itself was holding its breath. Chuck Norris planted his feet and centered his weight, eyes locked on the man in front of him. The crowd could see it now. The jokes were gone, the swagger stripped away. What remained was a seasoned fighter facing something he couldn't quite read. Across the mat, Steven Seagal stood unchanged. Same calm. Same open hands. Same quiet certainty. Chuck exhaled slowly, then stepped in, fully committed. No feints this time. No testing strikes. He launched forward with speed and power, driving in with a straight punch meant to overwhelm, followed by a hard step to crowd Steven's space. It was the kind of entry that crushed hesitation and punished indecision. Steven didn't retreat. He moved into the attack. To the audience, it looked impossibly subtle, a half step, a turn of the hips, a slight angle of the shoulders. Steven's left hand met Chuck's wrist at the exact moment of impact, not to stop it, but to redirect it. Chuck felt it instantly. The force he'd generated didn't disappear, it changed direction. Steven's right hand slid to Chuck's elbow. His body rotated smoothly, like a door swinging on a hinge. Chuck's punch missed its target and carried forward, pulling his balance off-center. Steven was already there. The grip wasn't tight. The movement wasn't violent. But Chuck's arm was suddenly not his anymore. Gasps rippled through the stands. Chuck tried to pull back, instinctively, but that reaction only fed the motion. Steven stepped through, guiding the arm in a smooth arc, aligning Chuck's momentum with gravity itself. The throw wasn't explosive. It was inevitable. Steven shifted his weight one last time. And then, thud. Chuck hit the mat flat on his back, the sound echoing through the arena like a dropped drum. Silence. No cheers. No screams. Just stunned disbelief. Steven stood over him, still holding the arm, not twisted, not damaged, just controlled. His posture was relaxed, breathing steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Chuck blinked up at the lights, chest rising and falling fast. He wasn't hurt. But he was shaken. Steven released the arm immediately and stepped back, giving space. No follow-up. No dominance. No celebration. Only restraint. The referee rushed in, then hesitated, unsure what there even was to intervene in. Chuck rolled to his side and pushed himself up slowly, eyes wide now, not with anger, but with realization. He flexed his wrist, rotated his shoulder. Everything worked. That somehow made it worse. The crowd erupted then, not in mockery, not in shock alone, but in awe. A standing ovation rose from every corner of the arena, applause crashing like waves. Commentators shouted over each other. That was it. He didn't even strike him. He used everything Chuck gave him. Chuck stood fully now, staring at Steven as if seeing him for the first time. You didn't force it, Chuck said, almost to himself. Steven nodded. I didn't need to. Chuck looked down at the mat, then back up again, a slow smile breaking through, humbled, genuine. I've spent my life using power, Chuck said. You just showed me something else. Steven inclined his head respectfully. Power ends things. Control prevents them. The applause grew louder. Was that skill, or something deeper? Comment skill or control below, backhand index pointing down. Steven offered his hand. Chuck took it. The two men stood side by side, legends not divided by ego anymore, but connected by understanding. And as the noise swelled and cameras captured every angle, one truth became clear to everyone watching. The move itself wasn't the most shocking part. The shocking part was how little Steven had needed to do. Because when force meets balance, force always loses. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled through the arena in waves, rising and falling, refusing to settle. People were on their feet now, not because they'd witnessed violence, but because they'd witnessed clarity. Something rare. Something clean. Chuck stood near the center of the mat, shoulders rising and falling as he slowed his breathing. The adrenaline was still there, but the tension was gone. He looked around, at the crowd, the cameras, the referees, and then back at Stephen. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just nodded. A small nod, but a heavy one. "I felt it before I hit the ground," Chuck said finally, his voice carrying without the mic. "The moment I committed, I was already done." The commentators went silent. Stephen remained composed. "That's usually when it happens." Chuck let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "You know what's funny," he said. "I came in here thinking this was about styles. About proving something." He gestured toward the mat where he'd fallen. "But that wasn't a fight, was it?" Stephen shook his head. "It was a lesson." That word lingered. Lesson. Not defeat. Not humiliation. The crowd picked up on the tone immediately. This wasn't a rivalry anymore. It was something closer to recognition. Chuck stepped forward and extended his hand again. Not for show, not for cameras. The grip was firm, respectful. Two men who understood what had just passed between them. "I underestimated you," Chuck said openly. "And your art." Stephen accepted the words without pride. "Most people do," he replied. "Until they don't." A referee cleared his throat, unsure if the event was technically over. The schedule said exhibition. The crowd wanted more, but not another clash. They wanted meaning. Chuck turned toward the audience, motioning for a microphone. When it reached him, he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent decades believing power was the answer," he said. "And tonight, I learned power isn't always about force." He looked back at Stephen. "Sometimes it's about restraint." The arena erupted again, louder than before. Stephen raised a hand slightly, calming the noise. He took the microphone, his voice even, unhurried. "Strength doesn't need to announce itself," he said. "And control doesn't need permission." People leaned in. Phones rose again. Stephen continued, "If someone mocks what they don't understand, it's usually because they're afraid of what it might reveal about them." Chuck nodded along, unoffended. In fact, relieved. The cameras caught it all, the posture, the expressions, the subtle shift from confrontation to connection. This was the moment that would be replayed, clipped, analyzed. A fellow official stepped forward and quietly spoke to Chuck, likely suggesting a wrap-up. Chuck waved him off. "One more thing," he said, turning back to Stephen. He bowed. Not exaggerated. Not theatrical. A real bow. The arena went quiet again, stunned by the gesture. Stephen returned it, equally understated. In that silence, something settled. No winner. No loser. Just two paths crossing, one moment of truth. Was this about winning or understanding? Comment, win or understanding. As the event concluded, people didn't rush for the exits. They stayed, talking among themselves, replaying the moment in their heads. They hadn't just watched a demonstration. They'd watched an ego dissolve. And as the lights dimmed and the mat was cleared, one thought echoed louder than the applause ever had. Real mastery isn't loud. It doesn't chase validation. It simply waits. Until force reveals itself. And when it does, it answers. By the time the lights dimmed and the crowd finally began to move, the story had already escaped the arena. Clips were everywhere. Phones buzzed. Notifications stacked. Headlines formed in real time. One move ends the debate. Control over power. When mockery met mastery. Within minutes, the footage spread across platforms, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame. People replayed the moment again and again, trying to understand how something so calm could be so decisive. But the real conversation wasn't about the throw. It was about what came after. The respect. The restraint. The absence of ego. In interviews later that night, Chuck didn't deflect. He didn't joke it away. He didn't minimize what happened. Instead, he owned it. "I went in thinking I knew the answer," he said. "And I learned I still had something to learn." That clip went viral on its own. Steven, for his part, avoided the spotlight entirely. No victory lap. No long explanations. When asked to comment, he kept it simple. Technique matters, he said. But intention matters more. Fans debated endlessly. Was it skill? Was it timing? Was it experience? Martial artists broke down footwork and angles. Commentators argued philosophy. Some still doubted, others converted instantly. But no one could deny what they saw. Force committed fully, and was guided safely to the ground. Ego met calm, and quietly stepped aside. Days later, the arena moment was still trending. Reaction videos piled up. Coaches showed the clip to students. Viewers who'd never cared about martial arts before watched with fascination. Because it wasn't just a fight. It was a mirror. A reminder that loud confidence isn't the same as control. That mockery often masks misunderstanding. And that true mastery doesn't need permission to exist. In a follow-up post that gained millions of likes, Chuck summed it up best. I went in to test a man. I walked out respecting a discipline. Steven shared nothing. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. If you believe true strength comes from discipline, control, and humility, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more powerful fictional stories like this. Because sometimes, the most shocking move isn't the one that ends a fight. It's the one that ends the need for one at all.